that.
For this Wednesday series, I'm talking to Courtenay Cabot Venton, who is an international development economist and consultant, has been consulting very big NGOs all over the world, and also founded the Share Trust. Courtenay, you are really an expert in this field, and you understood the power of women's self-help groups, which is what we're talking about today. How come they're so powerful, transforming families' lives out of poverty so effectively?
So first of all, I just want to say thank you, Stephanie, for having me on and for creating this space and for all the amazing energy and joy that you bring to really connecting women doing amazing things. I just think it's wonderful. So I am an economist by training, which means I've evaluated just about every intervention under the sun. And I was asked about 10 years ago to evaluate a women's self-help group program in Ethiopia. It's a very simple model. It's about 15 to 20 women who meet every week, and they do things like starting small savings, setting up businesses, but much more importantly, they support each other through their weekly meetings on the kinds of change that they want to see in their own lives and also in the communities around them. When I was asked to evaluate these women's groups in Ethiopia, I was truly blown away. I have spent much time talking to communities. I've worked in over 40 countries around the world, all people doing amazing things, but the vibe with these women's groups was totally different. They were on fire. They couldn't stop telling me about the amazing march that they'd organized for climate change, or how they'd taken up a position in the government for women's leadership and were now advocating for women's rights. They were just on fire. And one of the things that really blew me away about the women's groups in Ethiopia is that one of the things that they had all decided to do was to stop female genital mutilation, which is deeply cultural in Ethiopia. It's common across the vast majority of the population. And these women had decided that they were going to put an end to it in their communities, which I thought was incredible because nobody external was saying, hey, do you think this is problematic? Should we be thinking about this and trying to stop it? So these women's groups really were on fire, and I came back determined to do more to help support them. And that's why I set up the Share Trust, really to be able to help build this ecosystem of women's groups, but particularly because so much of what we do around poverty reduction is focused on access to resources. Do people have access to hospitals and schools? Whereas when I started to investigate the evidence behind these women's groups, what was actually the secret sauce was the social capacities of these women, the fact that they were shifting mindsets and supporting each other and providing peer-to-peer exchange, all of these things that we think are just things that are nice to have, were actually what were driving incredibly transformational outcomes for their families, their children, and the communities around them. So they were just amazing and blew my mind.
Courtenay, I love listening to you because that's really also my firsthand experience. So, how come this more aspirational work reduces poverty much faster?
I'm still trying to understand that myself. And I think that a lot of the way that we approach how we think about poverty is very much from a Western mindset and very much from a pull your socks up, get a job, the whole sort of American notion of rugged individualism. And I think that we're starting to understand more and more that your aspirations, your self-efficacy, your sense that you can create change, your networks that uphold you when you're going through a difficult time, or then where you can uphold someone else when they're going through a difficult time, that's actually what allows our sort of inner energy to release and to be able to really start to create transformational change. And that's when we then take advantage of having a good hospital or advocating for women's rights or all of these things that are really important. But unless you have a sense that you can create change, you won't access those or do much with them. And I think that's true across the world, right? And I think we've lost sense of the power of collective action, especially for me, where I've worked with self-help groups. The place where I've seen them as the most powerful, or where they're working with marginalized people, whether it's women, LGBTQI groups, disabled persons, people who really struggle to otherwise have a voice. They might be very scared to shout if it's just them on their own. But when there are 20 of them standing outside the local government official's office or standing up to somebody who's violating human rights in their community, it's very powerful and they're very brave.
Courtney, we know that magic happens when women gather, and these women self-help groups are very successful all over the world. Why isn't this the one thing that the world supports?
There's all sorts of answers to that, no doubt. And I won't even go down the paternalism route on this call. There's, I'm sure, many, many reasons why women's voices have been shut down. I think, though, it's also from a much more genuine programmatic perspective. It's really hard to quantify empowerment. How do you measure whether people are empowered? And then how do you look at what the outcomes of that are? Although part of why I fell in love with the self-help groups was because when I investigated the evidence, there are actually some really compelling studies that have started to tease that out and to show why it's so important. But I think we just need to get better at leaning into things like intuition and empowerment, and leaning away from constantly having to measure and quantify everything, and understanding that magic really does happen when women circle.
Courtney, so tell us a little bit as a last question what the Shared Trust does, what Ignite means, and the women's giving circle that you built around these.
Absolutely. So at the Shared Trust, we do a lot of work to try to really build the evidence, provide support to the many grassroots organizations that use women's self-help groups. But we also started a really exciting initiative last year, and we hope that others will join us. It's called Ignite, and it's a giving circle that brings together women who want to stand in solidarity with each other around the world, regardless of where they come from, what obstacles they're facing, really uniting around this idea and sharing solidarity with each other around this idea that when we circle, we move mountains. So last year we kicked off. We were small but mighty. We supported women's groups in Afghanistan, which have now become really critical to allowing women to access services against very restrictive Taliban regime and recent bans on women working for NGOs. This year, we're supporting groups in Uganda through local partners that we've been working with for over 3 years, who are doing incredible work with girls who have experienced gender-based violence, with LGBTQI groups, with self-help groups of disabled women who are absolutely transforming their community. We're a giving circle. You can join us, support these groups. You'll get updates on the kinds of things that they're doing and how they're working together to create change, but also have opportunities to share experiences across this incredible network of women globally.
Courtney, thank you so much for your work, and thank you for talking to me today.
Thank you, Stephanie. I so appreciate it.